So first of all, thank you very much for coming down. It means a lot to us, obviously, that you saw the play, and I suppose firstly I'd just be really interested to know what you thought about it.
I think, Rob, I was just curious. I didn't really know what to expect, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I turned up with my wife, and small studio, very intimate. You came running on, and it was an hour that moved very quickly. I thought that it was great, and it was great for a number of reasons. What I think it really caught was the essence of the man. I think that it was very personable, it was very sensitive, and it didn't dwell on the sensational stuff that normally is what people tend to focus on. So I'm very, very impressed indeed. It's remarkable that 13 years after his death, there's still so much interest about him. I think he was probably the last of the type. I don't think people like that are made anymore. Wherever you go, you meet people who, cab drivers or restaurateurs or people who say, I had a beer with your dad. He was very much a people's person and felt very comfortable in the pub, in the cafe. I remember being younger and sitting in a cafe and watching people reading their red top newspapers. And there's antics of my father, and they go, oh, good old Ollie. They identified with him, they identified with the things that he did.
We're here in the Hand in Hand, one of Ollie's Wimbledon pubs. And how important was the pub to Oliver Reed, do you think?
The pub was more important to him than the drinking. Pubs were away from it all a little bit, so one of the first things he wanted to do after finishing a movie, wherever it might be, was to go down to his local pub. And that was chewing the cud with your mates. That was talking about everyday things. That was being with people, just doing what you do, having a few beers. A pub houses your friends. You don't necessarily find your friends on a film set. You don't find them in a plush hotel or opulent restaurant. You find them down in your local. You get away from all of the shine and all of the glitz and all of the bright lights, and you come back to what is you. It's reflected through the people that you spend time with. So a pub is very much part of his grounding, very much part of him. His mates, bar very few, were the everyday Joes. They were in the road digs, they were piece of the paints, they were plumbers, they were tilers, they were roofers, they were people who worked on the land. He wasn't interested in sort of the academia and the class structure. He'd much prefer to be with real people down in the pub. I thought when I was young, when I was 3 or 4 or 5, I thought that everyone's daddy was on television. My early memories were very much of, not squalor, but certainly it wasn't opulent. We lived in sort of quite tough times. My father was mini-cabbing, he was just starting to act, he was just starting to make a few bob here and there. We lived number 1 Homefield Road here.
Yep, in the basement flat, is that
in
right?
the basement, and my early memories, I would have been 4 or 5, so in the early-ish 60s. So it's really before it started to truly take off for him.
But he was sort of jobbing actor, doing extra
he was
work
doing
and,
bits.
Yeah.
He was also doing a little bit of mini-cabbing. I used to come from here in my little pedal car off to the right down onto Ridgeway, to a little off-licence down there. In those days you only had just a little shop front, and behind that, where all the storage was, my father was out there drinking beer with all his mates when the pubs were closed. If anything, my mum was the one who was making the money. She was a model, and she was the one who used to come back with the money. He was taking that money, going into one of the pubs over yonder called the Swan, and hustling at cards for a few bob and being able to put half a crown back in the purse at the end of the evening. This is a photograph when I was on a tricycle, so I must have been 4 or 5, with my mother and my father. So this would be in 65, 66.
So Hammer era for
End
Ollie's
of
work?
Hammer era,
End of Hammer.
starting to move into things like the trap. Wimbledon, I think, probably did provide him with some form of stability. He was born here in 38. I was born here. My grandfather was born 2-3 miles from here.
Is the common very much part of your childhood and your life with Ollie?
It's very much my roots, and it's very much the roots of my father. He loved nothing more than being in the countryside, driving through it, walking through it, just being in it. It's what made him tick. And indeed, if you look at the houses that he lived in through the years, it was always in greenery. So it played a very significant part in his life. It was probably when I got to about the age of 8, 9, round about Oliver, when things really started to work for him, that he didn't want to take me swimming anymore. And going and doing those very public things became more difficult because there were just people wanting to talk to him. Here we've got a little time capsule.
Right.
It's a remarkable record of a 40-year career. And he literally, when he finished anything, he used to just drop it into this case. I'm very lucky in that there aren't that many people who have such a complete record of someone that they've lost. Not only in photographs like these, but there are thousands of photographs out there. There is lots of footage of him, lots and lots of films. So I'm very lucky in being able to not only see him in a still sense, but also to see him run and talk and walk and act. My father sort of shunned sort of the traditional training of the likes of RADA, which ironically was set up by my great-grandfather, his grandfather. He was never really into the sort of the formal walking the boards and sort of, that sort of the institutional side of theatre. Liked film, liked its freedom, liked the one-take-ness of it all, being able to go in, do what was necessary, and to walk away from it. If you're observant, as he was, and you can mimic, then in many ways that's probably a far better training ground than perhaps the more formal institutions that people go to today. He was certainly proud of where he came from in terms of the profession, of the fact that his grandfather built Her Majesty's Theatre in Haymarket, and that his uncle was Carol Reed. Carol was very important to him, significant. Carol said, "Don't get involved in this," after he came back from Hong Kong, Malaysia, and thought about becoming an actor. He's going, "Leave it alone." And so he ignored that. And later into his career, obviously in the making of Oliver, there was uncle and nephew working together. He came out of a time when people were making movies about poverty and about dripping taps and flat caps. It was the time of people like James Dean in America, and there had been no one over here who was being moody, who was being dangerous. He actually brought something different.
One of the things that is extraordinary about him as an actor is that he has this energy, but at the same time this stillness, and I think there is this kind of instinctive understanding of good film acting that is also channeling that incredible energy that he clearly had in his personal life.
But as Orson Welles said to him, "If in doubt, do nothing." He knew about stillness, he knew about looking moody, and he knew about keeping his mouth shut and doing nothing. He knew that stillness was where you got your mystery. I think he was probably the last of a type. I don't think people like that are made anymore. To him, life was a playground, and he didn't take it too seriously. We lived number 1 Homefield Road here.
Yep.
When I was young, I thought that everyone's daddy was on television. There was a very different side to him, which was much more thoughtful.
I'd just be really interested to know what you thought about the play.
What I think it really caught was the essence of the man.
We're not pretending that I am him.
There's only one Ollie Reed.
Absolutely. This is part of what is known as the Wimbledon 8, is it?
Yeah,
Where was it that the helicopter landed?
on this very lawn here. This is literally exactly as it was. Remarkably evocative of the time. I really didn't think it would feel like this, but it does. It's remarkable that 13 years after his death, there's still so much interest about him.